Build rockets out of Tetris blocks and watch them fall down in Bonkies. Is sending chimps to space more ethical when they have company?
Bright colors and smiling animals set a cheerful tone for an otherwise simple 2.5D block stacking game, featuring animated backdrops that make every planet feel alive. The texture of blocks generally gives a good indication of how heavy or delicate they are. The ones that look like rock almost always need 2 players to lift, and the glass bricks crack and eventually break into smaller pieces if they're thrown around. Between missions, you'll pilot a ship around cute hub worlds, opening up paths and collecting hints about block types or bits of emerging stories related to unlocking characters. After choosing your monkey for the mission, you can have fun with creating 3-letter names that might add a hat to your character if you're creative enough. All the characters play the same in co-op, so your choice is entirely aesthetic.
Bonkies is a party game where you work together to build structures under a time limit. Missions have 1 to 4 stages where you'll need to fill blue space with the provided materials, each stage building on the one before it, until the structure or the goal for the mission is complete. You'll progress from mission to mission, occasionally unlocking a new playable character, until you've completed enough to move on to the next planet, with new challenges and new characters to unlock. Each player is a primate, or other unlockable animal, with a robot arm and a jetpack. You'll relocate blocks by gripping them and flying to where they need to be. Pressing a face button will force your arm straight in the corresponding direction, stabilizing the object you're carrying according to which side you've grabbed. For instance, if you need to place a long brick straight up, one way is to grab the long side and stabilize your arm horizontally.
You'll notice quickly that many of the blocks feel very heavy. Some will require a simple boost by activating your jetpack, but heavier blocks will require at least 2 players to lift simultaneously. Together, you'll need to place blocks carefully so that each of them fit into the blue outline that makes up the mission's challenge, and we'll need to keep everything there for a 3-second countdown before the next stage unlocks, or the mission is complete. Finishing missions with enough time left on the clock will earn you bananas. Earn a banana in every mission on a planet and you will unlock an additional character. Each mission is initially puzzling as you need to determine how to fit the objects to make the required shape, or how objects will need to be balanced to remain in the space long enough. There can be some trial and error in your first attempt as only a couple blocks are distributed at a time, and you're not always sure what kind of block will come out next. Luckily, there's a decent amount of buffer space such that blocks don't need to fit absolutely perfectly for the game to register as success. Of course, little imperfections in your structure can add up to make success less likely. Missions are short, usually between 3 and 10 minutes, and we found the difficulty inconsistent between them depending on the various blocks that each mission emphasizes. Each of the planet hubs introduce new blocks that can change how missions are completed, such as rocket blocks that are used to push your entire structure upward, hover blocks that will stay wherever you put them, and blocks that explode when you handle them too roughly. Hover blocks tend to make missions easier, while the rocket blocks might have you pressing restart a few times before you succeed. We rarely had an issue with running out of time, but if the mission requires any tricky balancing or a particularly tall build, a moment of carelessness could bring the whole structure down, necessitating a restart.
The game can get quite difficult, and it's frustrating to spend a stage building a tall structure just to accidentally knock it down in the next stage. But we found the challenge manageable when we slowed down and took more care in placing or nudging blocks as needed. A few unique features that mitigate the challenge are the ability to stabilize the blocks in a certain direction while you're holding them, and the fact that you're allowed to touch the structure during the countdown. Even if your structure can't stay up without you holding it, you'll complete the mission as long as everything stays in the outline for a 3 count. We appreciated that the game didn't block progress based on how well you did in the levels, like in Overcooked for instance, but progression in Bonkies has its own limitations. Certain missions are required, and sometimes those are locked behind other missions. One planet will force you to play through almost every mission to unlock the next planet, while another will only require half, with few blocked. The way missions are chained together in the hub, sometimes you'll think you have freedom to avoid a difficult mission, only to discover that you need to complete both branches of the path to unlock a required mission. Since the game is fun, there were a few times we found ourselves wanting to skip a mission, but on a couple occasions, we had to restart a mission so many times we began to worry we wouldn't be able to play more of the game.
It's clear from the marketing and the menu layout that this game was made for co-op. The co-op campaign is the first option, and every level in the game is playable with up to 4 players. Each mission has a recommended player count, and some of the optional missions are either very difficult or impossible with only 2 players. Playing through the 2-player friendly missions, we saw several that would be much easier with 3 or 4 players, but there's of course a bit of a trade-off as more players means more chaos and more opportunities to knock over structures. With little room for error and keeping structures balanced, even 2 players seem too chaotic at times. The time limit might give you the impression that you need to split the responsibilities, but most situations require that both players work together, whether that can be one player holding a block in place while the other slides something underneath it, or both players lifting the same heavy block together. Even with 2 players working together, progress was slow lifting some of the heavier blocks. We never really got the hang of lifting them straight up without feeling like it took a tremendous effort. Oftentimes, it even felt like our upward movement stopped altogether, and it would take multiple separate attempts to get blocks where they needed to be. Perhaps they would be easier to lift with additional players.
Because mistakes are punishing, it's best if both players are aware of the plan, and because the tasks require cooperation, there's little opportunity for a better player to pick up the slack if needed. But the short length of the missions, the ability to quickly restart, and the fun of flying around and building mitigates some of the potential frustration. The solo campaign has unique missions that progress quickly towards some of the more complicated mechanics. It's much shorter than the co-op campaign, with only 2 planets, but it also includes a complete story arc and unlockable characters. The campaign repeatedly advertises co-op play, and is themed around your character eventually joining a team. The gameplay is the same as co-op, with the challenges optimized to be playable without a partner. It feels like a natural extension of the main game, with all the same charm, humor, and fun, and the mode doesn't repeat any of the puzzles or buildings from the co-op. At one point, the game says that every mission is playable cooperatively, and the game has the option to include a second player in the solo campaign. I was hopeful that this meant the game was completely embracing its co-op emphasis, and would allow co-op in the solo campaign, even if it took away some of the challenge. Unfortunately, the second player has absolutely no ability to help with construction. They don't have the required robot arm to grip objects, and seem to only be able to push blocks by flying into them. I'm perfectly fine with the solo campaign being a single player, but I felt misled by the game telling me co-op is an option when it really isn't. Ultimately, the limited single player is a fun addition, but don't buy this game if you have no one to play it with, as the bulk of the game requires at least 2 players. The co-op campaign has very little story. The animals on your team are basically contract employees that work under various bosses with the ultimate goal of earning a vacation. The solo campaign, on the other hand, acts as a side story to the co-op. You play as a primate named Kit, who is training to join the Bonkie team. After completing your training, your ship blows up, and your escape pod is launched all the way to Pluto, where each mission is treated as progress toward building a ship to return home. It's a short story, but it's an impressively thematic way to unlock Kit as a playable character in co-op.
We noticed a slight issue with the camera not showing enough of the usable space. When putting the final touches on a tall structure, the camera would not move up enough to see our characters placing the top block, making the action more dangerous than it should have been. We didn't run into any bugs or crashes.
Whether we were stretching our brains to think of combinations of inappropriate names for our characters, or watching a tower fall down seconds after a successful countdown, we had a blast playing through Bonkies. The fun theme, charming visuals, and intuitive controls combined to make a solid party game. If you're in the market for a party-style building game for 2 or more players, this is one we'd recommend.